I've been riding this bike quite a bit lately, and I know one improvement that I need to make ASAP. I need to put that panel back on there. I am just slow cooking my right thigh riding like this. And I bet that serves two purposes. It probably protects your leg and scoops some air around the back side of that head. So that piece did come with the bike, and just like everything else that came with the bike, it's a pretty big WTF. Kind of typical to Buell plastics. This one is cracked. There's some issues. Eventually I will make this thing decent. I think over the winter I'm going to do some body work, but now that we're at the beginning of the riding season, I just want to put this on here so I can ride it. But instead of keeping it this hideous, I think I will just paint it black and put it back. Found this can of roll bar and chassis paint in someone's trash, half used. Seems like the perfect stuff. Can is just about empty, but we'll see if I have enough to cover up some of this green. That was it. And judging by my super precise vernier calipers, it's 1 1/8" diameter pipe. Well, it was kind of hard to find P-clamps or 8L clamps of the right size. This is a part number I found on eBay, MIAC18X. Of course, I ended up with a few extra. I'm going to use some stainless hardware, which is what I should have used on the fender and belt guard. If I don't like the stainless color, I can just paint it black. But it's better than the black oxide because that stuff rusts up really quick. So that should help. Keep some of the heat off the bottom of the thigh and also direct a little bit of air on that back cylinder. The left side isn't as bad, but that's because the cylinders are biased to the right side. So I put a few miles on it now with this deflector. I would say not only does it no longer cook my leg, but it might even run a little bit better. It's like it was there for a reason. I've been riding this bike quite a bit lately, and man, that custom seat is literally a pain, both in the front and the back. My tailbone right now is hurting pretty bad after a couple weeks of riding this pretty regularly. So I'm going to swap that out. I was going to have that old seat recovered and with some new foam and everything, but then I found this one for dirt cheap, for about the cost of a cover. That looks better already. It's in pretty great shape. It's a stock thickness. It almost looks too big now, but let's see. Yeah, that's pretty much perfect. Last time I was riding the M2, I was a few miles from home when an unusual vibration began. These Buells are pretty smooth above idle, but the vibration never went away. Even at 4,000 RPM, I suspect the front isolator is shot. This is the first glimpse I have of that front isolator. Yeah, it just pulled the whole guts of it out. The whole thing sagged down, and up top you can see that it is completely fallen down inside. Now I have the excuse to swap out this shaved front mount. I want to put the stock airbox on one of my Buells just to see what it's like. At the same time, I'm going to do the XB rocker box conversion. Speaking of my S3, this is what its front isolator looks like from the bottom, and this is it from the top. Notice that big D washer sitting on top. And even if the isolator kind of sagged out, that would prevent it from pulling all the way down through. So I don't really see a huge D washer in there. Looks like just the nut. The previous owners, when they were messing with that front mount, just had a few pieces left over, didn't know what they went to, so they left them off. This isolator was doomed from the moment it was assembled without that D washer. When I bought this M2 from my friend, he included a box of random hardware that came with the bike when he acquired it. So I just looked in the box, and the first bag I picked up on top was the missing D-washer. All right, I'm going to lift up the front of the engine, hopefully. There's no big D-washer right there. Hey, I've got that rare Buell 2-piece front isolator. To get the mount off was these two, which were different sizes for some reason. Some really ugly stuff going on in this thread. How deep does that go? It goes like all the way through. Huh. I never even noticed that before. I'm glad I have my S3 for reference. I can see the way things should be done. Yeah, it's not supposed to be an open hole. Like chunks of metal. Need to just break those off or file those off. So that chunk of metal broke free. Don't know if it's a thread insert or just part of my head. God. Or part of the original bolt, I think. I bet that was part of the original bolt that they drilled off center. So this is the bolt they had in that hole. This is a part of a bolt that I pulled out of the hole that I would say matches the original sized bolt. They just didn't drill that out on center and then just jammed a bolt into it anyway, totally off center. So this went from bad to worse. You can see how the original one was centered on that boss, and their wonderful re-drilling put that way off center. I was going to be taking off the rocker box anyway to convert to the XB. That one wasn't even tight. But now that I've found that issue with the head, I'm going to be going a little bit further. Oh yeah, that sensor just floating around in space right there. I've never seen that before on this. This seems a little more cramped than on my S3. Well, that's an unusual direction, but it worked. That was barely in there. So I'm going to be rolling the engine over. Should probably take out both of them. That was also barely in there. Now that I got the two pieces of that original style rocker box off, I'm going to find top dead center to alleviate as much valve string pressure as possible so I can take off the actual rockers. Put a plastic straw down the cylinder to help give me a visual. I think that's about top dead center. The straw is as high as it'll go. Now 3 7/16. Now the 4 actual rocker bolts. Same length. Okay, but the 3 goes to the exhaust. Okay, I need to get the horn out and I need to move this throttle cable. There we go. How does this kind of stuff happen? Need to get this carburetor off. I must admit that's pretty cool. It's a breather bolt with a little screen in there and an inside clip. I'm going to end up replacing these with just a solid bolt because I'm going to the XB breathers. That one breather bolt is pretty rough. You can't even tell where the hex is supposed to be on this one. It's so messed up. Rather than just squeezing that hollow bolt with vice grips, let's see if I can just hammer on a wrench. Yep, that did it. There it is. A very similar design, but different. Doesn't seem like much plenum volume. I know I'm doing this all on the wrong side of the camera. Didn't know it was that easy. It's just a rubber press fit. Now I need to wiggle it out of here somehow. I had to disconnect that overflow tube. It's routed along the pushrod tubes for some reason. It's kind of weird. Just need to disconnect the throttle cables. Need to learn the proper way to remove those throttle cables. That was like really fiddly. It was right on the edge of coming off, but so much back and forth and here and there and up and down. Yeah, I got to shorten a 1/4 incher. All right, I made a set of shorties. Man, nothing is tight around here. Even says HD on it. That's a Harley Davidson bolt. Wow. The head of that bolt is all messed up. Can't get an Allen in it. Head should be free. How is it going to come out? On my friend's videos, when he brought this bike back to life, this was the stud that was giving him a lot of trouble. I guess that hole had a similar backstory as this one, where they screwed it all up. He made this stud to fit in there, so it worked for me. I wouldn't have any problem just keep running it that way, but I can't live with this issue on this hole. Got some carbon on it. Looks like it had a bit of a leak as well. I'm going to do the base gasket since I relieved the tension on this stack up. Might as well change out these lower pushrod seals while I'm here. Okay, so it has this little hole here for a roll pin there to locate it. Likewise there. That was almost too easy. I was thinking I might need an arbor press or something, but that wasn't bad. I'm worried about how the pushrod might fit in. I don't think I'd be able to just kind of work it down in there if it was on the bike. Maybe I should have to install them like already staged like this. I'll polish up the tubes before I get everything else dirty. The pushrod tube seals in the head are just an O-ring. There's a ring of carbon around the top of the cylinder. Oh boy, it's going to be like that. This is going to be almost impossible to get off. The base gasket has become one with the cylinder. I don't think I got it that hot. I never replaced one of these gaskets. I was just kind of poking it with this scribe, and it seems like it just wants to rip out, so I'll replace it. Trying to not stab into the casting. Couple pushrod seals in here as well. Pretty fiddly, but I got the exhaust lower cup off. And now the intake. So this head is used. It's a little dirty. Threads all look pretty good. I'm going to put it in the parts washer and clean it up. Man, that hole looks a lot better than the other one. A little bit of carbon. I don't think I'll do new seats. I might touch it up with a stone. Using the 30, 45, and 60 degree wheels on my valve seat grinder, I just touched both seats and then I lapped in both new valves. The lap surface is a little bit further out on the face than I was expecting, but it was consistent with the surface on the other head that I took apart and the other head that came with this one. So I'm going to run with it. I need to do some final cleaning on this and then assemble it. Used collars and new seals installed. New valve, springs, retainer, and keepers installed. Now both are installed. Assembly is the reverse of disassembly. I'm following the book for torque values and whatnot. I'm installing the front rocker box. While I'm here, I might as well take off the top two of this old style rocker box cover so I can put the XP cover on. I've been trying to figure out how to get this temperature sensor out of here, and then I remembered it has a separate connection. Everything's zip tied as possible on these things. That's the two-piece design. New gaskets installed and XP cover going on. I'll make sure that the gasket aligned. I have the new style rubber and steel sealing washers under these regular washers. Got it snugged down, wired back up. Time for the breather valve. Oiled it up a little bit, probably too much. I had to file a corner on the front rocker cover on my S3. So I'm going to wait to put this one on my M2 until I have the front motor mount on so I know how much to file. And the thing that started it all, the front isolator. Time to install a new one. I fed the new isolator mount up just to have the nut started on that center bolt. And you get these holes lined up carefully and install the proper bolts that go into the head, unlike the ones that came off that last head. I have Loctite on the threads. I have a little bit of oil on the washer. I'm currently just snugging them up, make sure everything went in smooth, which it did. And they are torqued to spec. It's nice to have the engine supported now. So test fitting this XP cover on the front, it's not sitting perfect. So just like my S3, it just starts to touch that front isolator mount. So I'll need to trim just a little bit off of that. I rubbed it against the mount just a couple times and you can see the shiny area where I'll need to just touch that with a file. We'll see if this works. Beautiful. I was fiddling with trying to install these for a while. These look the same when they're sitting side by side. When you put them on top of each other, yeah, they're definitely different. There is a front and rear, very faintly marked F and R. No surprise, it goes on much easier when you have the front to the front and the rear to the rear. It was still a little bit fiddly, and I learned that you basically have to put this one in first because this is the worst geometry here. It looks like someone had already kind of dug into it a little bit. But once that one was in, the others lined up. The book shows to point the slots toward the carburetor, I guess. I've seen some videos where they point the slots away, and I had to mount it with the slots towards the rear. So far, I would say getting the intake manifold on has been the most annoying part of this process. I've got a short, long, and a long short, and you can get a fraction of a turn out of one and a fraction of a turn out of the other. And now that I've got the engine mocked up again, I'm going to install the Stenzel brace that connects the front isolator to the mid isolator. And the funny thing is, this whole project started because I was missing the D washer on top, and now that I found it, I'm replacing it. Following the instructions, I take out this spacer and the D-washer and put that in place of both of them. Place the supplied washer on top of the engine mount bracket. This is the supplied washer. It must be this one. That's the right sized hole. But how about a picture? So the instructions say to take the factory washer from previously here and put it where I have this one. But that means there's no more washer here. I want a washer here, so I'm just going to add one from my stash between the two. In fact, I'm even adding one under the nut on the bottom side. And this is what it looks like installed. That's a tight fit. Does the wiring go above or below the bracket? Again, a picture might be handy. I'm guessing the wires go above the bracket. It seems to be a pretty snug fit, especially as it comes around there. I need to route the breathers now. I believe on my S3 I had this one coming to a T to tie into this one, and then they routed down the frame and off to the side. So something like this. Yeah, all the connections are barbed, but for a belt and suspenders, I put on these hose clamps as well. Time to put the carb back on. It was kind of a pain to take off. Let's see if it'll go on any easier. So I just got the cable, and it's both made in China and Taiwan. I must admit that I bought the wrong cable. I was searching for this cable, and everything that came up was this cable, so I absentmindedly bought that one. And it's this one that I need. The reason this one didn't show up is because this is incredibly hard to find. I'm not fluent enough in Harley cables or Buell cables to know if this is just a generic, what they call an idle cable, or if this is specific to Buell. Because when you search the Buell specific part number, nothing comes up in the US. There are some parts over in the Netherlands. Not only should I mention that one end is frayed really bad, the other end is kinked and would surely fray and break soon anyway. I might not even need the cable, but I'm going to replace it with one of these kits. Got the cable cut to length. Got some graphite lube in it. Got it routed. Need to adjust the tension on it a little bit, but looks like they're both working. The pull and the push. See, that's why I don't think that you really need the push, because it's got a spring action, but I'll put some tension on it and hopefully it'll serve its purpose. On my S3, I replaced those breather bolts with just these regular bolts. I'm going to do the same on my M2. I'm probably going to end up scraping the paint off when I put a socket on these, but the hardware store only had grade 8s, which were a little bit more than what I need here. I got ahead of myself and wasn't filming reassembling that. And I kept going and ended up putting the airbox on. Let's see what it takes to remove the fender. These acorn nuts and lock washers look a little cheesy. I had to sharpen this Allen wrench. It was all rounded out. Okay, everything else on this bike has been super loose. And these are super tight. Okay. I can get that. I'm going to strip this one out. That is way too tight. I assume it's supposed to be 3/16, but it's already a little bit rounded out. And a 3/16 is kind of loose in there. So I'm trying to press in a 5mm. Oh, man. That did it, though. Nice. I think I'm going to replace that bolt. Or just stuck like that permanently. Why don't I be so tight? Do you have to take the wheel off to get the fender off? That would be ridiculous. Or I just use two hands and squish it. Couldn't do that while I was holding the phone. Can't stand these mirrors, so they're going to go. The stock mirrors came with the bike. They'll probably have some issues that I'll need to sort out. Does that screw long enough? Piece of rubber hose. Well, that's someone's homemade expansion nut. Not a terrible idea. It's just a rubber hose and a nut that just jams it in there. That's probably why it never really got tight and why it was so annoying. Okay, this one had an extra little ring on it. I'm guessing so it wouldn't tighten up on the throttle. Same story. Rather than grabbing the whole mirror, I just have the bases. They're like a collet that tightens on the mirror stem. I might just paint these black before I put them back, but let's see if there's any obvious problems with them. No? I think those will work. Yeah, I guess it looks kind of dorky. Maybe like some bug antennas or something, but I don't care. It's going to be a more narrow profile if I ever want a lane split, or if I just want to walk between motorcycles in my garage. I don't have that mirror spinning around and grabbing me. I'm going to finally take this taillight off. I'm going to replace it with an original. So just for reference, it's hidden up under there. So half of it is covered as you're riding. It's kind of hard to see. Okay. The bike has a mating plug like this. I don't think that's original, but I don't have the mating plug for the original or the original. So I'm going to have my friend, Brickhouse Builds, put this plug on the new harness so I can plug it in. They're all smashed and cut up. I'll replace them while I'm here. That one's just chopped right in half. I'll do a wide flange one to give that fairing a little bit more meat to set onto. I was worried for a second that was the wrong size. Yep, that works. I borrowed the switch from this bike from my S3 to do some troubleshooting on that one, and I'm just going to leave it on that bike. So now I have a replacement key for this bike. The replacement switches come with ring terminals, and I needed this actual plug for that. Is it going to work? And can I do it one-handed? Yep, looks like both. Well, it's always something. So that hole in the dash does allow this to fit in, but the back side of it is about double the thickness of plastic of the same size. So when I'm coming in from the bottom side, there's too much meat and the switch sits flush. There's nowhere to grab onto the threads because of all that extra plastic back there. So if this ends up fitting correctly on my S3, this will go on my S3 and the M2 switch will come back here. I guess this shows the difference between the aftermarket and the original Buell. The factory Buell one has a smaller intermediate section, whereas this aftermarket one has this big fat spot. The S3 doesn't seem to have that big piece of plastic inside. Let's see. Weird. Why would that be different? Oh well, it was the S3 that had the bad switch, so it will have the replacement switch. The M2 switch will go back on the M2. I see one item I forgot to put on when I put that rear inner fender on. I found it in the part stash. Can't quite picture what it does. Maybe it deflects anything from coming around the pulley back down onto the belt. Well, it's going on. Here's how an exhaust should have been wrapped, unlike my Force exhaust that had a bunch of blue tape on it. So definitely better than what I currently have. It's going to need to be cleaned up though. And I can pair that header with this factory stainless muffler. I believe this is a 1 year only. 98 S3 I think is what these came on. 98 and 99 was kind of an overlap year where different models had the 2 versus the 2.5 inch exhaust. Well, I need to swap out the gas cap and the retaining ring. I'm guessing it's just gooped in here. I have to cut it out. After some assembly, this is an almost finished product. This will be the first attempt at a start. I'm going to let it warm up, hopefully get rid of that lifter tick, change the oil, and take it for a test ride. I did a warm-up lap to get the lifters pumped up. Everything seems good. It's got power, runs well. Now it's time to change the oil. Some of that I just put in there, but I consider this a break-in run. Gas cap got stuck. I just put this plate on, now I gotta take it back off. I think that rubber's pretty hard and it's just trapping it in there. Well, there it is in the middle of a ride. I don't have a way of doing onboard video, but everything seems to be working well. And it's good to have this bike back in action.